So today we're gonna have a look at one of the modules that is used a lot by our clients in the system in the e-learning, and that is the assessment builder module. I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see my screen?
I can see it.
Yes, thanks.
So on the agenda today, we will look at creating questions, creating assessments. We'll have a look at the types of assessments that can be used in the system. And then we'll also have a look at importing the assessments. So for this mastery session, we'll only cover the front end. We'll maybe touch here and there on a table or page in the system. But for all practical purposes, this will be a front end session, how the system works from the front end. In the following sessions, we'll dig a bit deeper into the technical design of Assessment Builder. All right, so first off, creating questions. So on Assessment Builder, you have different lists. The first one is the list of questions. So before you can build an assessment, you have to build a pool of questions that you're going to link to the assessment. Let me log in also from the front end. Oh, Bertie has a lot of good assessments here. Else we'll just create a few more. So when you log in, the functionality is located on one of the places the functionality is located. There's a few menus that you can use to access Assessment Builder. It's eLearning, Learning Management, Assessment Builder. You can access it also from shortcut menu on the administration portal. All right, so that is how you navigate to questions. So if you look at the list, there's a tree-view hierarchy, and on the top level, and maybe on levels below them as well, you have question categories. So question categories are just used to group different types of questions together, whether it be imported questions or the client builds their own repository of a question hierarchy that they reuse. But essentially, questions are categorized. Okay, so let's have a look at adding a question. All right, you will see there's text that is displayed on top of the question. We call the introduction. We have the question itself. This is the type of question. We have 4 types of questions in the system. Single selection, multiple selection, match column A with B, and select a missing word. So single selection is quite straightforward. It's a monkey puzzle type question where you have a question with anything from 2 to, let's say, 10 options, and you have one correct answer. Multiple selection is multiple answers, which can one or multiple of the answers can be the correct answer. Match column A with B is, I don't know if who of you have done electronic assessments recently, but you have a column on the left hand, you have a column on the right hand with option, and you have to match the two together. So you have statements on the left hand and answers on the right hand side, and you have to match the left to the right side. Select the missing word. We'll have a look at an example. Is a sentence, and one of the words in the sentence is a drop-down list with options. and you select the correct option. Okay, and you can have multiple options in the same question. All right, just interrupt me if it doesn't make sense, but we'll get through to an example just now. We have the question types. Something that I want to quickly show. So this is the question. The question can have a score, anything that you decide. Okay, if it's 0, then it's the sum of the answers. So let's say I have a multiple selection and 3 of the 5 answers are correct and you select 0, then it's the sum of the answers. So the sum of the correct answers will, let's say, each count one mark. So if there's 3 correct answers, then the question can count 3 marks. Also, you can specify and I think it's a multiple selection, you can specify the maximum answers allowed. In multiple selection, that is the number of correct answers. Together with the question, you can have a comment box, a comment block. So that's typically where you have to motivate your answer. The comment block can be either add more comments or add your views or motivate. Usually when it's motivate your answer, then the comments become mandatory. Okay, you also have a heading on the comment section. There's something that I quickly wanted to show with regards to answer groups before we go to a questions answers. So answer groups is defined as questions that you reuse frequently. Okay, so let's say you have a lot of questions where the answer is either true or false or yes or no. Then you create an answer group for yes, no, or true, false, and then reuse those answer groups within your question. So you don't have to create all of the answers every time. With every question, you can use an answer group. Okay, let's go to a question. Let's add a question from the front end. Okay, I'm going to add my questions here. So let's add a category. Okay, I can add a question here. So let's make the question. Let's type something here that I wanted to copy and paste instead of typing everything out. Okay. Okay, so this can be your introduction. Please read the question carefully before answering. And true or false, the Mediterranean rainforest is in Antarctica. Okay, this is a single selection. And so the question score is 1. At single selections, a maximum number of questions of answers allowed is 1. Let's motivate the answer. And let's show the comments block and let's make it mandatory. And say, so I can either save or just go to save and go to answers. Right, so this is my answers for this question. Okay. So let's say this answer is not correct. So in your question, you always have feedback. That is feedback that is always shown on a question. So let's make this thank you for answering the question. So it is text that is always shown on a question, and then you have let's say this is the incorrect answer and the score is 0. We'll give this feedback to the learner after they answer the question. Obviously, if they need to see feedback, so let's say false. False is the correct answer. The Mediterranean rainforest is not in Antarctica. Okay. And we'll say that is correct. So when the learner completes this assessment, at the end of the assessment or after questions, you can choose to give them feedback on the answers they have provided. So not all of the assessments you take only gives feedback at the end. Some assessments that are taken is used as a teaching mechanism more than it is to use to evaluate and give the person a final mark. Okay, save that answer. Great, I have 2 answers. The question, so I've added answers. The question itself can also have feedback that is always displayed, or correct or incorrect answer feedback. In other words, if you've answered the question correctly or not. So let's say question correctly answered. And let's say question incorrectly answered and question answered. Okay. The media tab on a question is used to display an image or a video, any media item that assists or explains the question. So in some cases, a client might have the following. They might play you a video, so you'd have a media item uploaded, it can be a video. And after you've listened to the video, you must answer a question about that specific video. So the question might be, does this person drive a whole truck, and that's a truck on the mine correctly? And they might show a video of somebody driving over a barrier or something like that. Okay, so I'm going to add a media item here just to show the media item. It's at the development process. All right, I have my question now. Let's add one more question. Okay. Let's not have an introduction, but please select the correct options for switching on your computer. Steps, let's call them steps. Let's make this a multiple selection question. Okay, there can be 3 answers, and the question score can also be 3. Save and go to the answers. Logging with your user password. That is actually a correct answer. Edit that. Okay, so make toast. That's not a correct answer. I don't think that's a correct option. if your computer does not switch on. Let's say that's a correct answer. Great, so I've added these two questions. All right, now I've added my questions. Just quickly wanted to show something. Yeah, no, it's not on this page. All right, so I can also change the display order of the options here. Okay, great. Right, so we have answer groups. I'm going to go to the assessment now. Standard feedback can be given after answer or question. It's not shown if it's blank. Correct feedback can be given after answer or question, not shown if blank. Only displays if answer is correct. Incorrect feedback is only displayed if the answer is incorrect. Media can be added to the question, video or image. This assists in explaining the question. Yeah. Any questions? Any questions on the questions?
No, from me.
Okay, great. So moving on to, now we have the questions, we have to create an assessment. Okay, let's add an assessment. Let's call the assessment today's date. And we have different assessment types. The assessment types I'll explain in more detail on a following slide. There is some explanation to do on the assessment types, as there are certain business rules associated with them. So I'm just going to say one thing on them. Mostly the business rules are geared toward the types of questions and the settings that can be added on the assessment or enabled on the assessment. I'll explain clicker assessments, but if you have a clicker assessment, you can't have a match column A to B type question, for instance, as the hardware does not allow you to select an answer. Okay, you can publish the assessment so it is visible on the LMS portal and on the mobile app on a dedicated area. The assessment has an introduction. You need to select a different type there. It shows all the other options. So you can give instructions in the beginning of an assessment. If it's a timed assessment, you will give it a limit. So let's say you give a limit of 60 minutes. So what will happen is technically in the background, the time that you spend on a question is saved. Between questions are saved. So when you reach 60 minutes, for instance, and that is your assessment time limit, the assessment closes and marks automatically. Okay. The maximum number of tries is how many times you can attempt a question. So you might only want the learner to try an assessment 3 times. Locking out the learner. So this is a soft lockout. So you can lock out the learner after they have consecutively failed the assessment for X amount of times. So mostly on the client side, this is used to give the learner the opportunity to go and study the material again before attempting the assessment again. So you might lock him out for 7 days after 3 consecutive failed attempts. So you don't want the learner just to keep on attempting the assessment until they get everything right. Okay. Required invigilator. Who knows what an invigilator is, what an invigilator does in an assessment? You can tell me.
Is it someone that keeps an eye on the student while, or the test taker, or someone that invigilates? helps when help is needed.
Yes, that's 100% correct. So it's the basically the teacher in the classroom. So that has a look over the assessment, that oversees the assessment. Probably not always has all the in-depth knowledge on the content of the assessment, but can assist with logical questions. If you've written a Microsoft exam before, the invigilator normally comes and logs you in and starts the assessment for you. So that you can't start it too early or gain extra time. They have to authorize you starting the assessment. So they have to obviously type in credentials and a password or something before you can start the assessment. But yes, as said, does not necessarily exist with content questions, but can assist with logical questions, yeah, on the assessment. So you have option where an invigilator is required. This is used at some of our clients, especially in the mining industry, where you have a classroom full of learners that may only start at a specified time. The invigilator in the classroom logs each person in and gives each person the go-ahead to start. Okay, there's different options here. You can select from employees, and you can select from assessors. Okay. And you can also select from employees or assessors with a unique access code. So there is functionality in Assessment Builder where the invigilator types in an access code, and that allows the learner to log in and start the assessment. There's mobile app settings. So these mobile app settings works on the Workplace Assessment app. So the Workplace Assessment app is a mobile app that Signify owns. It was developed specifically to facilitate practical assessments. So you are performing a physical action, you are doing a practical assessment like driving a truck on the mine, and the assessor assesses whether you can drive the truck or not based on standards that you must achieve during the assessment. Okay. So the questions of this assessment is answered while the assessor evaluates the employee. And when the assessor is online again, the assessment results are then synchronized back to the system. So there's not always internet access where the assessment is taken. The assessment might be that you show your excavating practice when excavating a mine in an underground mine 50 meters below the surface. So there is a good chance that there might not be internet access when you are assessed. So if I select visible and mobile app, these are sections or settings specifically applicable to the Workplace Assessment app. So believe it or not, proof requires you taking a photo of the learner to show that the learner was present during the assessment, and requires signatures on the mobile app. So you physically sign with your finger or with your stylus. Requires a GPS coordinates. The splash screens are just screens between the questions. So to show where a question starts and ends. An employee comment is required, assessor feedback is required. So these are all fields that are completed on the Workplace Assessment app. And when completed, it's stored against the assessment attempt for the employee. You have a pass mark for the assessment. You have a setting to display whether a question is mandatory or not. Okay, this is a requirement at some of our clients. So user question result of the question. Now, if you remember the correct and incorrect feedback, this is where the correct and incorrect feedback and the standard feedback is displayed when the setting is on. It's activated. The log to learner record, for those of you who've worked with it, physically writes a learner record. So if you do an assessment, if an assessment is done on you on driving a CAT 867 haul truck, then that learner record will be added when the results are synchronized back to the system. So the learner record just displays the basic result. This is a record, this is the date and time, and this is the outcome. Passed, completed, competent, not yet competent, and the score. All right, so when marking the assessment, you have an option of displaying the first score, the highest score, or the last score. So there are clients, especially in the restaurant industry, where they assess every few months and they want to keep the last score. Okay, so if you're assessed on a menu and you don't know the menu, then your last score will indicate that. Okay, most of our clients use higher score. It makes sense in most cases, but there are use cases for highest or for first and last score as well. All right, on the results page, so after the assessment has been taken, you can either show a smiley or a sad face, or you can show the learner's marks and score. You can allow the learner to redo the assessment even if they've passed. If this is unchecked, the learner will, if they have unlimited attempts, will do the assessment until they pass, and then the assessment won't be available anymore. So the assessment is, for most of the assessments, are accessible through the LMS portal. Show the user results after the exam or after the test. You can choose to show the learner the transcript of the assessment. And then open attempts. So open attempts is a bone of contention. But if you, and this is a setting I think that was added recently, to auto close open attempts. Okay, the attempts that are open for a year and are reopened a year later will have the following effect. You will have a learner record which was started in March 2022. And if you open an unclosed attempt again in March 2023, that will be the end date of the attempt. Okay, so the attempt will span over a year. Okay, there are attempts which are left open. So this is basically a cleanup action that is performed. Right, let's create the attempt. Let's create an assessment. It is a business rule that the assessment name has to be the same as a training intervention. There is a reason for this, and that is that on the learning pathway, when you do the assessment name won't say advanced Excel second exam, and you're doing questions actually on a training intervention advanced Word. Okay, so we're adding a formative assessment. There's always a question section created by default called general questions. You can add your own, edit the existing one. Right, we're going to link questions here. Oh, this question was created before. Okay, we can link this question. We're also going to link the other question. I should actually not reopen it again. Should use the same page. All right, so I've linked my two questions now. What you can do, when you link questions, you can also link a category, and then all questions below the category will be added to the assessment. Okay, so now we have an assessment. You can add media as well to your question section. Your question section being general questions. So let's add a media item here. Well, now that's probably a rather big video. But let's add it anyway. Right, while that video is busy uploading. So this is where you access assessments from. Also grouped in categories. An important rule on the assessment type is once it's saved, it cannot be changed. There are built-in rules that apply to assessment types, mostly on the question types that can be added or linked to it. Published to dedicated assessment survey area, we've covered that for mobile app learning portal use, assessment time limit. We've covered the lockout, the invigilator. Yeah, just a formal definition of an invigilator is he or she upholds the integrity of the external assessment process. Yeah, so they also search for suspicious activity. Okay, these days it is quite easy to take your mobile device into an assessment room. So yeah, they monitor if you're basically Googling the answers. So they also calm highly anxious students. The visible and mobile app is for the workplace assessment app. The log to learner record is used together with the key biased first or last score. An assessment attempt is directly linked to a learner record. Let me quickly show that while we see if, okay, we're still busy uploading. Let's just go to the database. So the prefix for the module is AB for assessment builder, AB assessment attempt. Right. Let me stop the query and display it in grid view. And let's only display the first 50 records. There is quite a few assessments already added to the database. I'm just canceling the query. Okay, the file was successfully added, so that should be interesting, displaying that large video. I quickly want to show the learner record. The link to the learner record. So this is the assessment attempts. So you'll see that the table has a learner record ID linked to it. Obviously, if you have an incomplete assessment, it won't have a learner record linked to it. So, but this learner record 9 is in the learner record table, where pk train rate is equal to 9. All right. We'll also see, let me quickly see in the learner record table, you will see that the learner record is linked. It was done from a pathway ID 32, and it is linked to a pathway assessment of ID 2. Pathway assessments where ID equals 2. PW assessments is the master data for assessments on the pathway, and that is finally linked to assessment, in this case also with ID equals to 2. Just a coincidence that the ID is the same, but they are different tables. Okay. This was the active listening assessment. Okay. On the results page, we spoke about the no image or faces and marks. So for those of you who've done the pollen and some of the assessments on the pollen, you'll remember that at the end of the assessment, you see a smiley face or a sad face, whether you've passed the assessment or not. So not all learners want to actually see the score, or not all assessment givers want to physically show the score. They just want to show whether you've passed or failed. It may be that you can deduce or guess what the answers was based on your score. So they just want to show you whether you've passed or failed. Okay. Allow redo. You can attempt assessment after it has been passed. And then this is the transcript. And the number of months before attempts are closed automatically. Let's preview the assessment. Right, let's go back to the assessment. Here's the assessments linked to the category. It's just important, if you preview an assessment and you pass the assessment, there's no learner record created for you. I'll start the assessment. I can actually now play the video. I've finished the video, and now I can answer the question. So I can plug the computer in, I can call a friend, and I can make toast. Mediterranean forest is in Antarctica, so false. And the teacher said so. Okay, save and continue. All right, this is where I can see if I've reached the end of the assessment. So no score or feedback is shown in this specific assessment. All right, are there any questions on the assessment, the creation, and what the logic behind the settings are? All right, let's carry on then. There is a lot of logic behind the assessments. It is a module that has evolved over the years. So there are probably some settings that you'll deal with. But then you're welcome to ask then as well. So there should be a lot of questions as the module is a bit involved. It's not 100% straightforward. You have generate shareable link as well. So you can now generate the shareable link. and then send this link. So this link can now be sent to somebody else through an email. When they click on the link, it will take them to the system. If they're logged in already, it will take them directly to the assessment. If not, they will need to log in first. Cancel in progress attempts. This is something that I haven't worked with recently, so I had to physically go and remind myself of what it does in the code. So all that it basically does is all the incomplete attempts are closed. So, and doesn't count towards the learner. So it just basically goes for all the attempts in A/B assessment attempts. I'm going to show this where there is a flag that says completed, where completed is 0 or false. It closes them. So what does close do? Close updates the valid to date to today. So all the attempts that you see on the front end are attempts that are still valid. In other words, the attempt valid to is equal to the high date. It's 9999/12/31. When you cancel the attempt, this date changes to today. And it is not visible on the front end anymore, although it's only visible on the back end. Let me stop that query. It's running longer than it should. Disable and replace assessment. So the use case for disabling and replacing assessment is if there's a new version of the assessment, then you can disable this assessment. Let's say this was version 1, then you can replace this assessment with version 2. Okay, so in the back end, what happens is all the references to version 1 is replaced with version 2. But it's not done immediately. That is only done in a SQL job in the nightly hours. There is, in some cases, a lot of references that needs to be updated. And it's not a good idea updating that when learners are still visible, are still busy now with the assessment at this moment. You can only choose to disable an assessment as well and not replace it, so you discontinue it. All right, types of assessments. So the different types of assessments and all serve a specific purpose. You first have a 360 questionnaire. So what is a 360 used for? So a 360 survey is normally sent out to employees on a yearly basis to do a 360 evaluation. That is people you report to, your colleagues, or people reporting to you. In other words, 360 above, beside you, and below you that evaluate your performance. Okay, so can you necessarily pass or fail a 360? Not with the score. So yeah, there's not a score like I get 50% in a 360. You get evaluated on a scale of, let's say, 1 to 5. And so you have 5 questions rated from 1 to 5. So it's not something that shows up on your learner record as well. Okay, the 360 in the system is used for the employee evaluation module for those questions, and it also feeds to performance management. So in performance management, you might now have received a score of 3.7 out of 5, and that score feeds to your performance contract. Okay, so it's not there are no correct or incorrect answers. You evaluate somebody based on their performance. Only single and multiple select questions are allowed to be added to a 360. You have a clicker assessment type of assessment. Who of you have seen clicker assessments or have heard about it? So the clicker assessment, for those of you who haven't heard about it, is an assessment that is done in an auditorium or classroom type of setting. So learners answering questions do not have a computer in front of them. They don't have pen or paper. They have a clicker. It's a sort of a remote control. On this remote control, you have options, let's say 1 to 9. So the facilitator facilitating the assessment, and these assessments are normally used for not computer literate. So you have a classroom full of students taking an assessment. A question displays on the screen. So the facilitator plugs in his laptop and projects his screen, shows the first question, a question A to E. And the learner sitting in the audience clicks the remote or the clicker, which has similar buttons, A to E. In some cases, they have more buttons than that. And that clicker is physically linked to the learner. So if I answer D, then that D is stored against my own name, as if I had taken the assessment electronically and clicked on D. So use the clicker device. It's used to answer. Only single select questions can be used for clicker assessment. I quickly wanted to show something here on signature while we're speaking about clickers. So the clicker is physically plugged into a person's or the facilitator's laptop. There's hardware plugged in there, sort of a USB type device that receives radio signals from the clicker. Okay, on the person's computer, we have developed a clicker WebSocket server that takes responses. So somebody sits with a clicker. Here, clicks the button, the signal is sent to the USB device. The USB device communicates with the clicker's WebSocket server, and the WebSocket server communicates with the web application that is open on the facilitator's laptop. Okay. So if you want just a quick overview on how the clickers work or is built architecturally, this is a good place to look on signature. If you Google, if you search for clicker. We have a coaching assessment. So a coaching assessment is used in the Mentor Coach portal. If you are mentoring or coaching somebody, you can send them an assessment that they need to do. Now that can be anything. If you're coaching somebody on the use of Excel or on C# basics, you can send them an assessment on C# basics to assess what their progress is while you're coaching them. Diminishing questions. It sounds like questions that are disappearing, and that is exactly what it is. So you have an assessment of questions. A learner goes through the assessment, answers all 10 questions, has 7 correct. The next time they take the assessment, only the 3 incorrect questions display. So questions that you've answered correctly previously does not display on the next attempt until you've answered all the questions correctly. So diminishing, disappearing, that is used in most cases as a learning tool for learners. You want to show them actually what questions they did not get right, what they should focus on. And also in a compliance situation, if you're working on the mind is very compliance driven. You have to get all the answers correct to display competence. So you can't have a learner take an assessment and not answer all questions correctly. When there's an accident on the mine, the Department of Mining Regulations wants to see that this person was competent on performing the operations or the work that they needed to do. All right, so then you have a survey. So the survey type of assessment, obviously there's no scores involved or no scores are calculated. So it just facilitates how you can build the assessment. So you're not allowed to add scores, and the correct options are selected in the different options available in building the assessment. So from a pathway step, at step 13 of 20, you can now have a survey that the user can complete before they continue. So a formative assessment. So formative assessments are usually used for practice or low stakes assessments, quizzes during training. It helps you also to identify strengths and weaknesses. At the other side of the coin, you have a summative assessment, and this is a type of assessment that is used at the end of a learning module to evaluate the learner against a specific standard or benchmark. In other words, you write a test counts out of 15, and you physically get a mark for the test. Which then determines obviously the learner's progress, whether they pass or fail, and have to redo the course. Normally ends in a grade. Sometimes great and sometimes not so great. So you have pre-assessments. When is a pre-assessment done? The pre-assessment is done to establish what the learner still has to learn. So it's used for interim evaluation before a learner, for instance, has to dig into learning material. They can first determine what they need to learn. So you might have a pathway with a pre-assessment, and then based on the pre-assessment, you have to pass the pre-assessment to go on to and study the learning material, for instance. So the pre-assessment can be a prerequisite on the pathway. The post-assessment, so that is given after an assignment. So normally on a pathway you would have an assignment step as well. And a post-assessment will come after an assignment step to gauge what the learner has learned, always during a semester or during a learning period. So it's basically see where you are, study, and how far have you come after studying the learning material. Any questions on the types of assessments? Okay, let's move on to the importing of assessments then. I'm going to show you the template. We go to the front end. An assessment builder, you have an import from Excel. You'll see assessments and questions are displayed. So you're importing an assessment. The assessment has to go somewhere, and the questions linked to the assessment has to go somewhere. So you can select the assessment and the category that the assessment and questions are imported to. Okay, you can also upload media. I'll explain that now. If I select, I can download the template, or I can download an example. Let's show you the template. So a template is an empty template. There is an Excel spreadsheet that gives an explanation of each of the fields. Category, for instance, optional if specified, the category will be created as subcategory, the import category. So if I select PP assessments and I say the category must be general questions, then general questions will be created below TP assessments. The activities, the training intervention. So each of the fields has a comment linked to them. This is a yes/no field, lockout learner. Number of days employee will be prevented from taking the assessment should assessment be failed a certain number of consecutive times. Required if lockout learner was yes. So there are quite a few fields. I'm going to scroll back to the right-hand side. Standard feedback provided to the learner directly after completing the assessment whether the question was answered correctly or not. Okay, the score per answer, normally 0 for incorrect answer, 1 for correct answer. So your answer fields in red, your question fields in purple, your section in light green, assessment details. All right, an example of how a completed template looks. All right, so this is the category and the activity, which is the training intervention. These are all assessment fields, and you start with your questions. So you'll see on the right-hand side, there's a line completed for every answer, not necessarily a line completed for every question. So this is a single selection question, yes, no. This is a multiple, yes, no, nay, yay. Okay. This is select the missing word question. So we'll get to the missing word now, because there is something involved to creating the question in a specific way. Okay, so any questions on the import? This is how the import sheet looks. There is validation done when you import a question, or when you import the assessment. So assessment will only be imported if all validation is passed. Okay, so this assessment has 2 question sections, 5 questions. Okay, Christine, any questions from your side?
No, not yet, thanks.
Let's show, select the missing word or question. Okay, I see we are out of time. I just quickly want to show this. So if you select the missing word, you will type your question like this. Okay. And this question will have a drop down with 3 answers and indicated with the bracket, the top bracket. I don't know what the correct name for that character is, square bracket. is the correct answer. So this is how you indicate that that is the correct answer. If I do this, let me save the question and just show one. Save and go to answers. You'll see that the answers are created. Okay, that is the answer. That answer has a score of 1. So that answer is created automatically based on the type of question and the input to the question. All right, that is all from my side for today on the assessment board. Are there any specific questions? Does it make sense?
It does.
Right. Thank you, everybody, for your time. I'll make the recording available after this. Have a good day.
Thank you, Theuns.
Thanks, Theuns.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.